The iron shackles bit into Brielle Palmer's wrists as she stood in the dusty street of Aztec, New Mexico, her eyes fixed on the weathered boards beneath her boots while a crowd gathered to witness her humiliation. It was 1878, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small frontier town, turning the air thick and oppressive as flies buzzed around the horses tied to the hitching posts along Main Street. She had never owed Marcus Hendry a single cent, but her brother Samuel had disappeared 3 months ago, leaving behind gambling debts that would take a lifetime to repay. And now she stood as collateral for his cowardice. Marcus Hendry was a portly man with greasy black hair and a cruel smile that never reached his cold gray eyes. He owned the largest saloon in town and had his fingers in every unsavory business venture within 100 miles. He stood beside her now, one meaty hand gripping her arm as he addressed the small crowd that had assembled. $2,500, he announced, his voice carrying across the street. That is what this woman's brother owes me. And since he has seen fit to vanish like morning dew, she will work off his debt in my establishment. Unless, of course, any gentleman here would like to purchase her contract. Brielle's cheeks burned with shame, but she kept her chin level. She was 22 years old, and until 3 months ago she had worked as a seamstress in the small shop her mother had left her. But Hendry had seized the shop to cover part of Samuel's debt, and when that had not been enough, he had come for her person as well. The territorial marshal had shrugged when she pleaded for help, explaining that the law was the law and debts had to be paid. The crowd murmured, some faces showing pity, others curiosity, and a few displaying the kind of interest that made Brielle's stomach turn. She scanned the assembled townspeople, recognizing most of them. Mrs. Chen from the general store looked away when their eyes met. Old Thomas, who used to buy shirts from her shop, shook his head sadly. No one would help her. No one could afford to cross Marcus Hendry. Then a figure stepped forward from the shaded boardwalk in front of the mercantile, and the crowd parted instinctively. Brielle had never seen him before, which meant he was new to Aztec. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His clothes were dusty from travel, but well made the shirt and vest of a man who worked for his living but took pride in his appearance. A gun belt sat low on his hips, and his boots showed the distinctive wear of a man who spent more time in the saddle than on foot. "I will pay it," the stranger said, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that made Hendry's smile falter. "And who might you be?" Hendry demanded, sizing up the newcomer with narrowed eyes. "Quinton Garrett," the man replied, stepping closer. Brielle could see his eyes now a startling blue-green, like the shallow waters of a desert spring. "I have the money." Hendry's expression turned, calculating. "All of it? $2,500 in hard currency?" "All of it," Quinton confirmed. He reached into his vest and produced a thick leather wallet, then began counting out bills with steady hands. The crowd pressed closer, craning their necks to see such a sum. It was more money than most of them would see in 5 years. Brielle watched in stunned silence as this stranger, this man she had never laid eyes on before this moment, counted out the entirety of her brother's debt without hesitation or haggling. When he finished, he held out the stack of bills to Hendry. "Her contract," Quinton said simply. Hendry's face had turned red, but he could not refuse such a direct transaction with witnesses present. He snatched the money, counted it twice himself, then pulled a folded document from his coat pocket. "She is yours," he said, practically spitting the words, "and good riddance to both of you." Quinton took the paper, unfolded it, and read through the entire document while the crowd watched. Brielle's heart pounded. What had she been traded from? Hendry would have worked her mercilessly in his saloon, subjected her to the advances of drunk men and his own unwanted attention. But what did this stranger want? Why would he pay such a fortune for a woman he had never met? When Quinton finished reading, he looked directly at her for the first time. His gaze was steady and searching, but not unkind. Then, to her absolute astonishment, he tore the document cleanly in half, then in half again, letting the pieces flutter to the dusty street. "You are free, Miss Palmer," he said quietly, "and no one owns you, not him, not me, not anyone." The words did not immediately make sense. Brielle stared at him, then at the torn pieces of paper scattered at their feet, then back at his face. "I do not understand," she whispered. "It is quite simple," Quinton replied. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and gently unlocked the shackles around her wrists. They fell away, and she rubbed the raw skin beneath, still unable to process what was happening. "Your brother's debt is paid. You owed nothing in the first place. You are free to go wherever you wish." Marcus Hendry made a strangled sound of outrage. "You cannot just, that contract was legal." "The contract is destroyed," Quinton said, turning those calm eyes on Hendry. Something in his expression made the larger man take a step backward. "If you have a complaint, take it up with the territorial judge, but I suspect he will tell you the same thing I am telling you now. This matter is concluded." The crowd began to disperse, sensing the show was over and perhaps uncomfortable with having witnessed Brielle's near enslavement. Hendry stood sputtering for a moment longer, then turned on his heel and stormed back toward his saloon, his boots raising small clouds of dust with each angry step. Brielle found herself alone on the street with her unexpected savior. The afternoon sun seemed less oppressive now, or perhaps she simply felt lighter without the weight of those shackles. She looked up at Quinton Garrett, this stranger who had just spent a fortune to free her, and felt tears prick at her eyes. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Why would you do such a thing for someone you do not even know?" Quinton removed his hat, revealing more of that sun-streaked hair, and held it respectfully. "I rode into town about an hour ago," he explained. "I heard people talking about what Hendry planned to do. It seemed to me that a great injustice was about to occur, and I have the means to prevent it." He paused, then added more softly, "My sister was once in a similar situation. I was too young and too poor to help her then. She spent 3 years working off my father's debts before she saved enough to buy her own freedom. I swore that if I ever had the chance to spare another woman that fate, I would take it." The simple honesty in his words struck Brielle deeply. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing dust across her cheeks. "I do not know how to thank you," she said. "I have nothing to give you, no way to repay such kindness." "I ask for no repayment," Quinton assured her, "though I would accept the courtesy of your company for supper, if you are willing. I am new to Aztec and know no one here. It would be pleasant to share a meal with someone who might tell me about the town." Brielle hesitated, years of propriety warring with gratitude and an unexpected pull toward this quiet-spoken stranger. But propriety had done nothing to save her from Hendry's clutches, and this man had just given her back her life. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I would be honored to join you for supper." They walked together down Main Street toward the only respectable restaurant in Aztec, a small establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Harrison, who served simple but wholesome food. Brielle was acutely aware of the curious glances they received from townspeople peering through windows and lingering in doorways. News would spread quickly that the stranger had not only paid Brielle's debt, but had torn up her contract and set her free. By morning, everyone in town would be talking about nothing else. The restaurant was nearly empty, the supper hour not yet begun in earnest. Mrs. Harrison showed them to a corner table, her shrewd eyes taking in Brielle's disheveled appearance and the raw marks on her wrists. "Water for washing," she said firmly, disappearing into the back before Brielle could protest. She returned moments later with a clean basin and cloth. "You freshen up, dear. I will bring coffee and biscuits while you decide what you would like." The small kindness threatened to undo Brielle's composure entirely. She accepted the basin gratefully and cleaned her face and hands, wincing as the cloth touched her abraded wrists. When she looked up, Quinton was watching her with concern. "Those should be tended properly," he said, nodding toward her injuries. "Do you have salve at home?" "I do not have a home anymore," Brielle admitted, the words bitter on her tongue. "Hendry seized my shop and the rooms above it to cover part of Samuel's debt. I have been staying in a boarding house, but my last week's rent came due yesterday. I expect Mrs. Kimball will have already rented my room to someone else." Quinton frowned. "Where are your belongings?" "I have little enough. Some clothes, my mother's sewing kit, a few books. They are still at the boarding house if Mrs. Kimball has not already thrown them into the street." "We will retrieve them after we eat," Quinton decided, "and then we will find you proper lodgings." Brielle shook her head. "Mr. Garrett, you have already done far too much. I cannot accept more charity from you." "It is not charity," he replied. "It is basic human decency. You cannot sleep in the street. Miss Palmer, allow me to help you get settled, and then I will trouble you no further if that is your wish." Mrs. Harrison returned with coffee and a plate of fluffy biscuits, still warm from the oven. She set them down and announced that she would bring them both the beef stew and cornbread, which was the evening's special. Brielle realized she had not eaten since the previous night, and her stomach responded to the smell of food with an audible growl. Quinton smiled the first genuine smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his serious face entirely, crinkling the corners of his eyes and revealing even white teeth. "Eat," he urged. "You have had a terrible day. No one should face their troubles on an empty stomach." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, and Brielle felt some of her strength returning with the hot food. When the edge was off her hunger, she studied the man across from her more carefully. He had the look of someone who spent his life outdoors, the weathered skin, the calloused hands, the alert way he held himself even while seated. But there was an education in his speech, and a consideration in his manner that suggested he had not always been a drifter. "You said you are new to Aztec," she ventured. "Where do you come from?" "Most recently from Colorado," Quinton replied. "Before that, Texas. Before that, various places. I work with horses, training them mostly, though I will break them if the pay is good and the animal is not too far gone." "Is there work for that here?" "I hope so. I heard there are several large ranches in the area that might have need of my skills. I plan to inquire at them tomorrow." He took a sip of coffee, then added, "Though I confess my arrival in Aztec today was not entirely planned. I was headed toward Farmington originally, but my horse threw a shoe about 10 miles south of here. By the time I walked him into town and found the blacksmith, it was too late to continue. I decided to stay the night and get a fresh start in the morning." "And instead, you spent all your money on a stranger," Brielle said softly. Quinton met her eyes. "Not all of it. I have enough left to sustain me while I find work, and I do not regret the expenditure for a moment, Miss Palmer. Some things are more important than money." Something in his steady gaze made Brielle's breath catch. She looked away, focusing on her stew. "Please, call me Brielle. After what you have done for me, formality seems rather absurd." "Then you must call me Quinton, or Quinn if you prefer. Most people do." They talked more easily after that, the conversation flowing naturally despite their short acquaintance. Brielle told him about her seamstress shop, how her mother had taught her the trade, and how she had built a modest but respectable business after her mother's death 2 years ago. She spoke of her brother Samuel, and the anger in her voice was impossible to hide. "He was always wild," she said, pushing her spoon through the remains of her stew. "Even as a boy, he could not settle. Cards, dice, horse races, if there was a wager to be made, Samuel would make it. Our mother despaired of him. When she died, I thought perhaps he would steady himself, take some responsibility. Instead, he grew worse. He would disappear for weeks at a time, then return with empty pockets and wild stories. I gave him money when I could spare it, hoping it would help him make a fresh start. Instead, he went to Hendry's saloon and lost it all, then borrowed more on my name without my knowledge or permission." "You are not responsible for his choices," Quinton said firmly. "The law disagrees with you," Brielle replied with a bitter laugh. "Family debt is family debt according to Marshall Cooper. When Samuel disappeared, that debt fell to me." "Your Marshall is either lazy or in Hendry's pocket," Quinton observed. "Probably both. The law is not nearly so simple as he claimed. You could have fought the contract, appealed to the territorial judge." With what money? What influence? Marcus Hendry owns half this town, and the other half is too frightened of him to speak up. I am just a seamstress, Quinn. I have no power here. You are a woman who built a successful business through her own skill and hard work, Quinton corrected. That takes more courage and strength than most men ever show. Do not diminish yourself because others failed to protect you as they should have. His words, spoken with such quiet conviction, made Brielle's throat tighten with emotion. She had spent the past 3 months feeling helpless and ashamed, watching everything she had worked for slip through her fingers while the town looked on. To hear someone acknowledge her worth, her effort, her right to better treatment, it was almost overwhelming. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for seeing me as more than just a problem to be solved or a debt to be collected. Quinton reached across the table and briefly touched her hand, a gesture of comfort that sent unexpected warmth through her. You are a person, Brielle. You deserve to be treated as such. I'm sorry the people of this town forgot that. Mrs. Harrison returned to clear their plates and bring apple pie for dessert, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Quinton told her amusing stories about difficult horses and the various characters he had encountered in his travels. Brielle found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in months, the tension slowly draining from her shoulders. By the time they finished eating, the sun had set and the street outside was painted with the blue shadows of dusk. Quinton paid for their meal over Brielle's protests, then offered her his arm as they stepped out into the cooling evening. They walked together toward Mrs. Kimball's boarding house on the edge of town, and Brielle felt the curious eyes of Aztec following them through every lit window they passed. Mrs. Kimball was a sharp-featured woman who greeted them at the door with obvious displeasure. Your room was rented this afternoon, she informed Brielle without preamble. You can collect your things, but then you will need to leave. That is precisely what we intend, Quinton said smoothly, before Brielle could respond. If you would be so kind as to direct us to Miss Palmer's belongings. Mrs. Kimball sniffed but led them upstairs to a small room at the end of the hall. Brielle's possessions had been unceremoniously piled in the corner, 2 carpet bags of clothing, her mother's precious sewing kit in its worn leather case, and a small wooden box containing her few books and personal items. It was a pitifully small collection, everything she owned in the world. Quinton gathered the bags without comment while Brielle picked up the sewing kit and the wooden box. They descended the stairs under Mrs. Kimball's watchful glare and stepped back out into the night. There is a hotel on Main Street, Quinton said. Nothing fancy, but clean and respectable. Let us get you settled there. Quinn, I cannot afford a hotel, Brielle protested. I have less than $3 to my name. I will cover it for the first week, he said, raising a hand to forestall her objections. Consider it part of making things right. You were wronged, Brielle. You lost your home and your business because of your brother's actions and Hendry's greed. 1 week's lodging is the least anyone could do. After that, we will see where you stand and what options are available. Brielle wanted to argue, but exhaustion and the emotional toll of the day were catching up with her. She nodded, blinking back tears. 1 week only, and I will find a way to repay you, Quinn. I swear it. I will not hold you to that promise, he replied gently. But if it gives you peace to make it, then I accept. The hotel was indeed modest, but clean. The proprietor, a balding man named Mr. Jessup, showed them to a small room on the second floor with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the street. It was simple, but to Brielle, after the fear and uncertainty of the day, it looked like sanctuary. Quinton set her bags down carefully, then stepped back toward the door. You should rest, he said. This has been a difficult day for you. Where will you stay? Brielle asked, suddenly not wanting him to leave. I will find a place, he assured her. Probably the livery stable, if the owner will allow it. I have slept in worse places. That hardly seems fair, given that you have paid for my comfort. Quinton smiled that transforming smile again. I am used to it, truly. A pile of hay and my bedroll are luxury enough for me. He hesitated, then added, I will come by in the morning, if that is acceptable. I want to make sure those wrists are properly tended, and I would like to help you consider your options for moving forward." "Yes," Brielle said quickly. "Yes, please. I would appreciate that very much." He touched the brim of his hat in farewell, and then he was gone, his boots echoing in the hallway and down the stairs. Brielle stood alone in her small room, listening to the sounds of the hotel settling around her, and tried to make sense of the extraordinary turn her life had taken. This morning she had woken in despair, facing a future of servitude in Marcus Hendry's saloon. Tonight she was free, fed, housed, and under the protection of a man who asked nothing of her. It was too much to process. She sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to cry great, shuddering sobs that released months of fear and frustration and grief. When the tears finally subsided, Brielle washed her face in the basin, changed into a clean nightdress, and crawled into bed. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, she fell almost immediately into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to bright morning sunlight streaming through the window and the sounds of Aztec coming to life below. For a moment she could not remember where she was, and then everything came flooding back. Hendry, the shackles, Quinton tearing up her contract. She touched her wrists gingerly, feeling the soreness of the abrasions, and wondered if yesterday had been some kind of fever dream. A knock on the door dispelled that notion. "Brielle? It is Quinn. May I come in?" She threw on her wrapper and opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, looking fresh and alert despite having spent the night in a stable. He held a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Good morning, Gore," he said. "I hope I did not wake you, but I wanted to catch you before I headed out to the ranches. I brought salve for your wrists and some bread and cheese from the mercantile for your breakfast." He handed her the packages, his expression concerned. "How are you feeling today?" "Better than I have in months," Brielle admitted. "Still trying to believe yesterday really happened, but better." She stepped back. "Would you like to come in? I know it is not entirely proper, but given the circumstances." Quinton hesitated, then nodded. "Only for a moment. I do not want to damage your reputation any further." He entered but left the door open and stood near the window while Brielle sat on the bed and unwrapped the salve. "Let me help," he offered, crossing to kneel beside the bed. He took the tin of salve and gently applied it to her abraded wrists, his touch careful and impersonal. Brielle watched his bent head, noting the way the morning light caught in his hair, and felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the man himself. "There," he said, finishing the second wrist. "That should help them heal properly. Keep applying it twice daily until the skin is sound again." "Thank you," Brielle said softly. "For this and for everything else." Quinton sat back on his heels, meeting her eyes. "I am going to ride out to the Garrett Ranch this morning, no relation despite the name. They are the largest horse operation in the area, and I'm told they often need skilled trainers. If I can secure a position, I will be staying in Aztec for the foreseeable future." "I hope you find what you are looking for," Brielle said, and meant it. The thought of him leaving, of never seeing him again after he had so dramatically entered her life, was surprisingly painful. "As do I," Quinton replied. He rose to his feet. "I will return this evening to check on you if that is agreeable. Perhaps we could take supper together again?" "I would like that very much," Brielle admitted, feeling her cheeks warm. After Quinton left, Brielle ate the bread and cheese he had brought, then washed and dressed in one of her better dresses, a simple blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. She braided her dark brown hair and pinned it in a coil at the nape of her neck, then sat and considered her situation. She needed work. The $3 in her pocket would not last long, and she could not depend on Quinton's charity indefinitely, no matter how kindly offered. Her sewing skills were excellent, but without her shop and equipment, she had limited options. She could perhaps find work as a seamstress in someone else's establishment, or take in mending and alterations from home, though she no longer had a home. An idea began to form. She gathered her courage, picked up her mother's sewing kit, and ventured out into the late morning sunshine. Her first stop was the general store. where Mrs. Chen greeted her with obvious relief. "Brielle, I am so glad to see you," the older woman said, coming around the counter. "I heard what that stranger did yesterday, paying off your debt and setting you free. It is the first decent thing I have seen happen in this town in a long while." "It was more than decent. It was miraculous," Brielle replied. "Mrs. Chen, I need to ask a favor. I want to resume my seamstress work, but I no longer have a shop. Would you allow me to put up a notice here, advertising that I'm taking commissions? I could work from my hotel room for now." Mrs. Chen's face brightened. "Better than that, dear. I have that back room that is just collecting dust and spiders. You could use it as a workroom if you like. I cannot pay you rent for it, but I will not charge you either. And every woman who comes in here asks after you and your beautiful work. I can send them straight back to you." Brielle felt tears prick her eyes again. "Mrs. Chen, that is too generous." "Nonsense," the older woman said briskly. "You are a good girl, Brielle Palmer, and you have been treated shamefully. Those of us who were too cowardly to stand up to Hendry can at least help you get back on your feet now." She leaned in conspiratorially. "Besides, your work is far better than that of Mrs. Henderson, who has been taking all the sewing business since your shop closed. The women will be thrilled to have you available again." By the time Brielle left the general store an hour later, she had examined the back room, which was dusty but spacious and had excellent light from a large window, and had begun planning how to set it up as a workspace. Mrs. Chen had even offered to loan her a table and chair from her own home until Brielle could afford to purchase her own. Her next stop was at several of her former clients' homes. She called on Mrs. Thompson, who immediately commissioned 2 new dresses and insisted on paying half in advance. She visited the Reverend's wife, who needed alterations on her Sunday dress and 3 shirts taken in for her growing son. By the time Brielle returned to the hotel that afternoon, she had secured enough work to keep her busy for at least 2 weeks, and had collected enough advance payment to cover her hotel room beyond the week Quinn had promised. She felt lighter than she had in months, not back to where she had been before Samuel's disappearance, but at least moving in the right direction. She was building something again, taking control of her life piece by piece. That evening, Quinton appeared at her door promptly at 6 o'clock, and the smile on his face told her everything she needed to know before he spoke. "The Garrett Ranch offered me a position," he said, unable to contain his pleasure. "Head trainer with a cabin of my own, and better pay than I have seen in 2 years. I start tomorrow." "Quinn, that is wonderful," Brielle exclaimed, clasping her hands together. "I am so happy for you." "And you? How has your day been?" She told him about Mrs. Chen's offer and the commission she had secured, and watched his expression warm with genuine pride. "That is excellent, Brielle. I knew you would land on your feet. You have too much strength and skill to stay down for long." They went to Mrs. Harrison's restaurant again, and this time their conversation flowed even more easily, like old friends catching up rather than near strangers navigating new acquaintance. Quinton told her about the ranch, the vast acreage, the quality of the horses, the foreman who had interviewed him and seemed impressed by his knowledge. "The only drawback is the distance," he admitted. "The ranch is about 8 miles from town. I will not be able to visit Aztec frequently, perhaps once a week when I come in for supplies." Brielle felt her heart sink, though she tried to keep her disappointment from showing. "Of course, you will be busy with your new position, I understand." Quinton looked at her intently. "I will make a point to come to town on Sundays, if you would like to continue our acquaintance. I have enjoyed your company very much, Brielle. More than I expected, to be honest. I find myself reluctant to say goodbye." "I feel the same," Brielle admitted, her cheeks warming. "I know we have only just met, but you have done more for me than anyone else ever has. I would very much like to continue knowing you, Quinn." His smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Then it is settled. I will see you on Sunday, if not before." They lingered over their meal, neither wanting the evening to end. But eventually Mrs. Harrison began pointedly stacking chairs on tables around them. Quinton walked Brielle back to the hotel, and they stood outside in the warm night air, the sky above vast and filled with stars. "Thank you again," Brielle said softly, "for everything, for saving me, for believing in me, for being so unfailingly kind." Thank you for giving me a reason to stay in Aztec, Quinton replied. I have drifted for a long time, Brielle. It feels good to have someone to stay for. The words hung between them, charged with meaning. Brielle felt her breath catch, saw Quinton lean slightly closer, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. But then he stepped back, touching his hat brim in his habitual gesture of farewell. Good night, Brielle. I will see you on Sunday. Good night, Quinn. She watched him walk away into the darkness and touched her fingers to her lips, wondering what it would feel like to kiss him. The thought made her pulse race, and she hurried inside before she could do something foolish like call him back. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Brielle worked steadily in her new space at the general store, her fingers flying over fabric as she created beautiful dresses, altered existing garments, and mended tears and worn spots. Word spread quickly that she was available again, and soon she had more work than she could easily manage. The advance payments allowed her to purchase her own table and chair, and then fabric and thread to replenish her depleted supplies. She moved from the hotel into a small set of rooms above the bakery, which the baker's widow, Mrs. Foster, rented to her at a reasonable rate. They were not as nice as her old rooms above the shop had been, but they were clean and private, and they were hers. Slowly, carefully, Brielle was rebuilding her life. True to his word, Quinton appeared every Sunday. They would attend church together in the morning, an act that silenced much of the gossip about Brielle's scandalous rescue and established them as respectable members of the community. After church, they would share dinner at Mrs. Harrison's restaurant, then walk along the river that ran south of town, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Brielle learned more about Quinton's past during these walks. His family had been farmers in Missouri, but his father had gambled away their land when Quinn was 15. His mother had died of a fever the following winter, worn down by hardship and heartbreak. His older sister Margaret had been indentured to a wealthy family to work off their father's debts, and Quinn had watched helplessly as she was essentially sold into servitude. She survived it, Quinn told Brielle, as they sat on the riverbank one warm afternoon in late September. But it changed her. When she finally earned her freedom, she moved to California and married a merchant there. She writes to me sometimes. She has a good life now, but she lost years to paying for our father's mistakes. Is that why you helped me? Brielle asked softly, because of Margaret? Partly, Quinton admitted, but not entirely. When I saw you standing there in those shackles, looking so proud despite everything, I saw someone worth fighting for. Someone who deserved better than what life had handed her. I could not walk away from that. Brielle reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. They had not progressed beyond hand-holding and the occasional arm around her shoulders, but the connection between them deepened with every meeting. She found herself thinking about him constantly during the week, counting down the days until Sunday when she would see him again. What happened to your father? She asked. Quinn's expression darkened. He drank himself to death within a year of losing the farm. I was 16 when he died. I have been on my own ever since, working where I could, learning about horses from anyone willing to teach me. I discovered I had a talent for it. Horses make sense to me in a way people often do not. You make sense to me, Brielle said quietly, more sense than anyone else ever has. Quinton turned to look at her, and the intensity in his blue-green eyes made her breath catch. Brielle, he said, his voice rough with emotion. These past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, it has meant more to me than I can properly express. You are the strongest, most resilient person I have ever met. Your courage humbles me. I do not feel very courageous, Brielle admitted. I feel grateful every day that you walked into my life when you did. We were both lucky that day, Quinn said. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made Brielle's heart ache. I am falling in love with you, Brielle Palmer. I think I have been since the moment I saw you standing in that street, refusing to bow your head even in the face of injustice. I know it is too soon, that we should perhaps court properly for longer, but I cannot help how I feel. Brielle felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "It is not too soon," she whispered. "I have been falling in love with you too, Quinn. Every Sunday I see you, I fall a little more, and every day in between I miss you more than I should miss someone I have known such a short time." Quinton cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. "Yes," Brielle breathed. "Please." He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, and then his lips met hers in a kiss that was both gentle and passionate, tender and claiming. Brielle felt it all the way to her toes, a warmth that spread through her entire body and made her fingers curl into the fabric of his shirt. She had been kissed before awkward, fumbling attempts by boys in her youth, but this was different. This was a man who knew what he wanted and was unafraid to claim it, while still respecting her completely. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quinton rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said simply. "I know it is fast, but I am certain. You are what I have been looking for without knowing I was searching. Build a life with me, Brielle. Let me spend every day proving that I will never let you down the way others have." Brielle's heart soared. A practical part of her mind whispered that this was indeed fast, that they had known each other barely 2 months. But a deeper, truer part of her recognized that Quinton Garrett was the best man she had ever met, that he had already proven his character and his devotion, and that she would be a fool to let propriety stand in the way of happiness. "Yes," she said, laughing through fresh tears. "Yes, I will marry you, Quinn. Nothing would make me happier." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Brielle melted into his arms, feeling safe and cherished in a way she had never experienced before. They held each other as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and made plans for their future together. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church, with Mrs. Chen and her husband standing up for Brielle and the ranch foreman and his wife standing up for Quinton. Brielle wore a dress she had made herself cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, the most beautiful thing she had ever created. Quinton wore a new suit purchased for the occasion, and when he saw her walking down the aisle, his expression of pure love and wonder made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The reception was held at Mrs. Harrison's restaurant, which the generous widow had closed to the public for the afternoon. Half the town seemed to squeeze into the small space, eager to celebrate the unlikely romance that had captivated Aztec. Even Marshall Cooper showed up, looking vaguely ashamed, and pressed an envelope with $20 into Brielle's hand with a mumbled apology for not protecting her better. Marcus Hendry did not attend, but Brielle had not expected him to. She had seen him only once since the day of her liberation, when she passed him on the street. He had glared at her with such hatred that she had instinctively moved closer to Mrs. Chen, who was walking beside her. But Hendry had said nothing, just continued on his way, and Brielle had hoped that was the end of it. After the reception, Quinton drove Brielle out to the Garrett Ranch in a borrowed wagon piled with her belongings. The cabin he had been assigned was small but sturdy, with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace that would keep them warm through the coming winter. It sat on a small rise overlooking the horse pastures, with a view that stretched for miles across the high desert landscape. "It is not much," Quinton said, as he helped Brielle down from the wagon, "but it is ours. I will build onto it as we need more space. Maybe add a proper bedroom, and eventually a room for children if we are blessed with them." "It is perfect," Brielle assured him, taking in the cabin and the view and the man standing beside her. "It is more than I ever thought I would have after everything that happened. You gave me my life back, Quinn, and then you gave me so much more." "You did the same for me," Quinton said, pulling her close. "I was drifting before I met you, just moving from place to place with no real purpose. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something lasting. You gave me a home." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless and awed. Brielle had been nervous, her experience limited to what she had gleaned from married friends' vague hints and her mother's brief, awkward explanation years ago. But Quinton was patient and gentle, guiding her through her uncertainty until nervousness gave way to pleasure and then to a profound sense of connection. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Brielle traced the scars on Quinton's shoulders and arms, the marks of a life spent working with powerful animals and living rough. "Tell me about this one," she said, touching a particularly prominent scar on his ribs. "A stallion I was breaking in Texas took exception to the saddle," Quinton replied with a chuckle. "He threw me into a fence post, broke 2 ribs, and gave me that scar. I sold him to a man who wanted a wild horse to match his wild temperament and made a tidy profit." Brielle laughed, delighting in his stories. They talked late into the night, sharing secrets and dreams and fears, building the foundation of intimacy that would sustain their marriage through the years to come. The months that followed were among the happiest of Brielle's life. She continued her seamstress work, now traveling into town twice a week to work at the general store and meet with clients. Mrs. Chen's back room had become truly hers, a space where she created beautiful garments and earned a steady income that she contributed to the household. Quinton never asked her to stop working, never suggested that her earnings were his to control. They pooled their resources and made decisions together, partners in every sense of the word. At the ranch, Quinton's reputation grew as word spread of his skill with difficult horses. Ranchers from throughout the territory began bringing him their most challenging animals, and he worked miracles with patience and understanding that others lacked. The ranch owner gave him a raise and built a larger cabin for them, this one with 3 rooms and a proper kitchen. Winter came, bringing cold winds and occasional snow to the high desert. Brielle learned to love the quiet evenings by the fire, sewing while Quinton read aloud from books they borrowed from the small lending library in town. They grew closer with each passing day, learning each other's rhythms and habits, building a partnership that felt as natural as breathing. In February, Brielle realized she had missed her monthly courses twice. She told Quinton over supper one evening, watching his face light up with joy and wonder. "A baby?" he said, coming around the table to kneel beside her chair. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby?" "I believe so," Brielle confirmed, smiling through happy tears. "I wanted to be certain before I said anything, but yes, I think we will be parents by late summer." Quinton kissed her tenderly, then laughed with pure delight. "A father," he said wonderingly. "I am going to be a father. Brielle, I promise you, I will be nothing like my own father. Our child will grow up safe and loved and cherished. I swear it." "I know you will," Brielle assured him, cradling his face in her hands. "You are the best man I've ever known, Quinn. Our child is so fortunate to have you as a father." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring. Brielle continued working until her growing belly made it difficult to lean over the sewing table for long periods. The women of Aztec showered her with gifts, hand-knitted blankets, tiny gowns, advice both wanted and unwanted. Mrs. Chen appointed herself Brielle's guardian, insisting she rest more and eat better. Quinton was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He worried constantly about Brielle overexerting herself, tried to prevent her from lifting anything heavier than a teacup, and drove her to distraction with his hovering. But his devotion was so genuine, his love so evident, that Brielle found it impossible to be truly annoyed with him. On a hot August afternoon, Brielle's labor began. Mrs. Foster, who had delivered half the babies in Aztec over the years, came to stay with her, sending Quinton outside with instructions to boil water and stay out of the way. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the afternoon and into the evening, but finally, as the sun set in a blaze of color, Brielle delivered a healthy baby boy. "You have a son," Mrs. Foster announced, placing the squalling infant on Brielle's chest. "A fine, strong boy with a good set of lungs." Quinton was summoned inside, and he approached the bed with the kind of awe usually reserved for religious experiences. He looked at his wife, exhausted and radiant, and their son, still red-faced and crying, and tears streamed down his face. "He is perfect," Quinton whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. The infant immediately grasped his father's finger, and Quinn laughed through his tears. "Look at that grip. He will be a horseman for certain." They named him Thomas after Brielle's father, and he proved to be a good baby, healthy, curious, and blessed with his father's even temperament. Quinton was a devoted father, rising in the night to walk with Thomas when he fussed, changing soiled napkins without complaint, and spending every free moment simply holding his son and marveling at him. Brielle watched her husband with their child and fell in love with him all over again. She had known Quinton was a good man, but seeing him as a father so gentle, so patient, so full of wonder revealed new depths to his character. Life settled into a new rhythm, one punctuated by feedings and diaper changes and the small milestones of Thomas's development. Brielle gradually resumed her seamstress work, bringing Thomas with her to town and setting up a cradle in the back room of the general store where he could sleep while she sewed. The women of Aztec cooed over him, and Mrs. Chen declared him the handsomest baby she had ever seen. When Thomas was 6 months old, an incident occurred that reminded them their happiness was not universally celebrated. Brielle was working at the general store when Marcus Hendry entered. She had managed to avoid him for nearly a year, and seeing him now made her stomach clench with old fear. Hendry approached the counter where Mrs. Chen stood, but his eyes were on Brielle in the back room. "I see the little seamstress is doing well for herself," he said, his voice carrying a sneer. "Quite the fairy tale, is it not? Poor girl saved by a knight in shining armor, now playing house with his bastard." Brielle felt her face flush with anger, but before she could respond, Mrs. Chen stepped between them, her small frame radiating fury. "You will leave my store immediately, Marcus Hendry," she said, her voice like steel. "You have no business here, and you will not speak to Brielle or about her child in such a manner." "Or what?" Hendry challenged. "You will throw me out? You and what army, Mrs. Chen?" "She will not need an army," came a voice from the doorway. Quinton stepped inside, his expression dangerous. He had been loading supplies into the wagon outside and had clearly heard every word. "But she does have me, and I am more than sufficient." Hendry turned, and whatever he saw in Quinton's face made him take a step backward. "This is none of your concern, Garrett." "My wife and son are very much my concern," Quinton replied quietly, but there was steel beneath the soft tone. "You will apologize to Brielle and Mrs. Chen, and then you will leave. And if I ever hear that you have spoken to or about my family in such a manner again, we will have a very different conversation." The two men stared at each other, and the tension in the small store was thick enough to cut. Finally, Hendry looked away, his face red with anger and humiliation. "My apologies," he muttered, the words obviously costing him. Then he turned and stalked out of the store. Quinton immediately went to Brielle, who was trembling with reaction. Thomas clutched protectively to her chest. "Are you all right?" he asked, gathering them both into his arms. "Yes," Brielle said, though her voice shook. "He just startled me. I have not seen him in so long, I thought perhaps he had forgotten about us." "Men like Hendry do not forget," Quinton said grimly. "Their pride will not allow it. But he will not bother you again, Brielle. I will make certain of that." True to his word, Quinton made a point of accompanying Brielle into town more often after that, his presence a clear warning to Hendry to keep his distance. The saloon owner seemed to take the hint, and they heard nothing more from him. The years passed, marked by the slow accumulation of happy moments. Thomas grew into a sturdy, bright-eyed boy who followed his father around the ranch, learning about horses almost before he could walk. When he was 3, Brielle gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's striking eyes. 2 years after that came another boy, Samuel, named not for Brielle's wayward brother, but for Quinton's grandfather, who had been a kind man despite his son's failings. The cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family. Rooms added one at a time as Quinton's skills brought in better and better pay. Brielle's seamstress business thrived as well, and eventually she was able to purchase a small building on Main Street, opening a proper dress shop that employed 2 other women. They faced challenges, of course. There were lean years when drought affected the ranches and work was scarce. There were illnesses, a frightening week when Sarah developed a terrible fever, and Brielle and Quinton took turns keeping vigil beside her bed until it finally broke. There were the normal trials of raising children, the worries about money and health and the future. But through it all, their love remained constant. Quinton still looked at Brielle as though she were the most precious thing in his world. Brielle still felt her heart skip when she saw him riding up to the house at the end of a workday. They still talked for hours after the children were asleep, sharing their days and their dreams and their concerns. One evening when Thomas was 10, Sarah 7, and Samuel 5, the family sat around the dinner table and Thomas asked a question that had clearly been puzzling him. "Father, how did you and Mother meet? Was it romantic like in the stories?" Brielle and Quinton exchanged glances and Quinton smiled. "It was not romantic at first," he admitted. "It was actually quite terrible. Your mother was in trouble through no fault of her own, and I happened to be in the right place to help her." "What kind of trouble?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide. Brielle considered her answer carefully. Her children knew the broad outlines of the story that their Uncle Samuel, whom they had never met, had left debts behind when he disappeared, and that their father had helped their mother when she was in difficulty. But they did not know the full, shameful details of her near enslavement. "My brother made some very bad choices," Brielle explained, "and his choices affected me unfairly. Your father paid money to fix the situation, and then he became my friend. And over time, our friendship became love." "But why did you help Mother if you did not know her?" Thomas pressed, looking at his father. Quinton was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. "Your mother was being treated unjustly, and I had the means to help. I could not walk past someone who needed aid, especially when that person was as strong and brave as your mother." "Was Mother very brave?" Samuel asked. "The bravest person I have ever known," Quinton confirmed, smiling at Brielle across the table. "She faced a terrible situation with courage and dignity. That is what made me fall in love with her. Her strength, her resilience, her refusal to be defeated by circumstances beyond her control. That is why we named you Thomas and you Samuel," Brielle told her sons, "to remind us of our past, both the painful parts and the people we loved, and to remind you that names are just names. It is your actions that define you, not what you are called or where you come from." The children seemed satisfied with these answers, and the conversation moved on to other topics. But later that night, as Brielle and Quinton lay in bed, she turned to him in the darkness. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Spending all that money on me? You could have used it to buy land, to start your own ranch instead of working for someone else. We could have had an easier life." Quinton pulled her close, his arms secure around her. "I have never regretted it for a single moment," he said firmly. "Not one. That money bought me the greatest treasure I could ever have, you, and this life we have built together. I would spend it again 100 times over, Brielle. You are worth more than all the land and horses in the territory." "I love you," Brielle whispered, pressing her face against his chest. "I loved you that first day, I think, though I did not recognize it then. When you tore up that contract and told me I was free, it was like you breathed life back into me." "You did the same for me," Quinton replied, kissing the top of her head. "I was just drifting before you, surviving but not really living. You gave me purpose, Brielle. You gave me a home and a family and a reason to be the best man I could be." They fell asleep in each other's arms, as they had nearly every night for almost 11 years, and Brielle felt the deep contentment that came from being exactly where she was meant to be. More years passed. Thomas grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's way with horses and his mother's practical intelligence. He began working alongside Quinton at the ranch, learning the business from the ground up. Sarah developed a passion for sewing and spent hours in Brielle's shop, her nimble fingers creating increasingly complex and beautiful work. Samuel turned out to have a head for numbers and a love of books, and they made plans to send him to school in Santa Fe when he was old enough. Brielle and Quinton aged gracefully together, silver threading through their hair, laugh lines deepening around their eyes. The love between them, rather than fading with familiarity, seemed to grow richer and deeper with each passing year. When Thomas was 18, he fell in love with a rancher's daughter named Elizabeth, a spirited girl with red hair and a laugh that rang like bells. He asked his parents' advice before proposing, and Quinton told him the same thing he had believed since the day he met Brielle. "When you know, you know," he said simply. "Your mother and I knew quickly, and we have never doubted. If Elizabeth is the one, do not waste time with excessive caution. Life is uncertain, and happiness should be claimed when it is offered." Thomas and Elizabeth were married the following spring in a ceremony that Brielle organized with loving attention to detail. Sarah was a bridesmaid, beautiful in a dress she had helped sew herself. Samuel, now 13 and shooting up like a weed, stood up for his brother with the kind of solemn dignity that made Brielle's heart squeeze with pride. At the reception, Brielle found herself standing with Quinton at the edge of the celebration, watching their son dance with his new wife. "We did well," she said softly. "Look at them, Quinn. Look at this family we built from nothing." "Not from nothing," Quinton corrected, taking her hand. "We built it from love, from determination, from the decision to be better than the circumstances we were handed. You were never nothing, Brielle. You were always everything." She turned to face him fully. This man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. His face was lined now, his hands scarred and worn from decades of hard work, but to her he was as handsome as the day he had stepped forward in the dusty street and changed her life forever. "Dance with me," she said impulsively. Quinton smiled and led her onto the makeshift dance floor. They swayed together to the fiddle music, and Brielle rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of his soap and leather and the outdoors. "Do you remember that day?" she asked, "when you paid my debt and tore up that contract?" "I remember every detail," Quinton replied. "The look in your eyes so fierce and proud even in chains. The way the sun caught in your hair. The exact moment I knew I could not walk away from you." "I was so frightened," Brielle admitted. "I thought my life was over. And then you appeared, like something out of a story. My own personal miracle." "We saved each other that day," Quinton said, pulling back to look into her eyes. "I gave you freedom, but you gave me a reason to use my freedom for something meaningful. You made me want to be the kind of man worthy of you." "You were already that man," Brielle assured him. "You proved it the moment you stepped forward to help a stranger." They danced until the music ended, then stood together watching their children and the community they had become part of. Brielle thought about the scared woman she had been standing in shackles in the street, believing she had no future and no hope. She thought about the drifting cowboy who had seen an injustice and refused to let it stand. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. For saving me, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me." Quinton kissed her softly, a kiss that held 11 years of devotion and countless more to come. "Thank you for saying yes," he replied. "To dinner that first day, to my proposal by the river, to every day we have shared since. You are my heart, Brielle. You always will be." The years continued to roll by like the river that flowed past Aztec, steady and inevitable. Thomas and Elizabeth built a house on a piece of land they purchased with help from both families, and soon there were grandchildren, first a boy they named Quinton, then twin girls. Sarah married a lawyer from Santa Fe, a kind man who supported her desire to continue her seamstress work even after marriage. Samuel went off to school as planned and eventually became a teacher, returning to Aztec to educate the next generation. Brielle's dress shop became the most successful business of its kind in the Northern Territory. Women came from miles around to purchase her creations and those of her employees. She hired more seamstresses, trained them in her exacting standards, and created beautiful work that brought joy to everyone who wore it. Quinton became a legend in horse training circles. Ranchers throughout New Mexico and into Colorado sought him out for the most difficult cases. He never lost his patience, never resorted to cruelty, and horses that others had declared hopeless would gentle under his hands. The ranch owner eventually made him a partner, recognizing that Quinton's reputation drew business from far and wide. They prospered, but prosperity never changed them. They remained the same people who had met on that dusty street in 1878, she fierce and resilient, he steady and kind. Their love remained the cornerstone of everything they built. One summer evening when they were both in their 50s, Brielle and Quinton took a rare moment alone. Their children grown and gone to their own homes, the grandchildren returned to their parents. They sat on the porch of their house, expanded over the years into a comfortable ranch home, and watched the sun set over the pastures. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if we had never met?" Brielle asked, her hand in his as always. Quinton considered the question. "I think I would have continued drifting," he admitted. "Moving from place to place, working where I could, never putting down roots. I would have been lonely without knowing why. I would have survived, but I would not have truly lived." "I think I would have survived too," Brielle said quietly. "I am stronger than Hendry ever gave me credit for. I would have found a way to endure, to escape eventually. But I would have been broken in ways that might never have healed. I would have lost something essential about myself." "But we did meet," Quinton pointed out, squeezing her hand. "We found each other at exactly the right moment, and look at everything we built from that chance encounter, this home, our children, our life. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." "I love you, Quinn," Brielle said, the words as true now as the first time she had spoken them by the river all those years ago. "Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me, for loving me so completely." "Thank you for letting me," Quinton replied, "for trusting me when you had no reason to, for building this life with me, for being my partner in every way that matters. You are the best decision I ever made." Brielle Garrett. They sat together as darkness fell and stars emerged in the vast New Mexico sky. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from nothing. The desert air cooled around them, crickets began their evening song, and somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied softly. More years passed, and they aged further, but their love never diminished. They moved a bit slower, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work, but they still held hands, still talked for hours, still looked at each other with the same devotion. When they were both in their 70s, Quinton fell ill with a fever that would not break. Brielle nursed him through it, with the same fierce determination she had shown in every challenge they had faced. She sat by his bedside day and night, bathing his face with cool cloths, forcing broth between his lips, refusing to let him go. "You cannot leave me yet," she told him during the worst of it, when his breathing was labored and his skin burning hot. "We have more years together, Quinn. More sunsets to watch, more grandchildren to spoil, more life to live. You stay with me." And he did. The fever broke on the 7th day, and though it took weeks for him to fully recover his strength, he survived. When he was finally well enough to sit up on his own, he pulled Brielle close and kissed her with all the passion of their younger days. "I heard you," he said. "Even in the worst of it, I heard you telling me to stay. I could not leave you, Brielle, not when you commanded me to remain." "Good," she replied, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Because I am not finished with you yet, Quinton Garrett. We made a vow together forever. I intend to hold you to it." They had nearly a decade more, those precious final years filled with the sweetness of time that both knew was limited. They watched their grandchildren grow and begin having children of their own. They celebrated anniversaries and holidays surrounded by the family they had created. They worked less but savored more, finding joy in simple moments, morning coffee on the porch, evening walks when the air cooled, reading together by lamplight. Quinton passed first, peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks after his 81st birthday. Brielle woke beside him as the sun rose, felt the stillness of his body next to hers, and knew immediately that he was gone. She did not cry out or panic. Instead, she lay beside him for a long time, holding his hand and saying goodbye to the man who had been her everything for more than 50 years. "Thank you," she whispered to him in the quiet of their bedroom. "Thank you for that day in the street, for every day after, for loving me so completely. Wait for me, Quinn. I will not be long behind you." The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the territory. Quinton Garrett had touched countless lives through his kindness, his skill, his quiet generosity. Stories were told of his legendary patience with difficult horses, his willingness to help anyone who needed it, his devotion to his family. Brielle stood straight and dry-eyed through the service. Her children and grandchildren gathered around her. She had shed her tears in private, in the early morning hours when she lay alone in their bed and felt the crushing weight of his absence. In public, she maintained the same fierce dignity she had shown that day in the street so many years ago, refusing to crumble even under the weight of profound grief. She lived 2 more years after Quinton's death, years spent finishing final projects in her shop, playing with her great-grandchildren, telling stories about the love she and Quinn had shared. She made certain everyone knew how they had met, how he had saved her, how they had built a life together from nothing but love and determination. "Your grandfather was the best man I ever knew," she told Quinton's namesake, her grandson, one afternoon as they sat together. "He saw injustice and refused to accept it. He gave me my freedom, and then he gave me his heart. That is what true love looks like, not grand gestures, but the daily choice to stand beside someone, to believe in them, to build something meaningful together." Brielle passed away peacefully one spring morning, sitting in her favorite chair on the porch, a quilt wrapped around her shoulders and the sun on her face. Her daughter Sarah found her there, a slight smile on her weathered face, looking more peaceful than she had since Quinton's death. They buried her beside him, their graves marked by a simple stone that read, "Quinton and Brielle Garrett together forever, from freedom to love." The entire town of Aztec turned out for her funeral, just as they had for his, honoring the woman who had overcome injustice to build a successful business and a beautiful family. In the years that followed, their story became legend in Aztec. Parents told their children about the cowboy who paid a debt to save a stranger, tore up her contract, and set her free. About how that act of kindness blossomed into one of the great love stories of the territory. About how 2 people who had every reason to become bitter and cynical instead chose hope and love and built something that lasted more than 5 decades. Their descendants thrived. Thomas took over the ranch training business and expanded it, becoming even more successful than his father. Sarah's dress shop continued for another generation, run by her daughters and granddaughters. Samuel founded a school that still bears his name, educating children throughout the region. But more than businesses or buildings, Quinton and Brielle left behind a legacy of love. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren all grew up hearing stories about how they met, how they loved, how they faced challenges together with courage and devotion, the example they set of kindness to strangers, of standing up against injustice, of choosing love even when circumstances were difficult shaped generations. In Aztec, New Mexico, their story became woven into the fabric of the town's history. The dress shop, though no longer owned by family, displayed a small plaque that read, "Founded by Brielle Palmer Garrett, 1878. The Garrett Ranch training program became renowned throughout the West, and every trainer who worked there learned the philosophy that Quinton had established: patience, respect, and understanding. But perhaps the truest memorial to their love was the simple fact that decades after their deaths, people still spoke of Quinton and Brielle Garrett with affection and admiration, still told their story to illustrate what true love looked like, still pointed to them as an example of what was possible when 2 people committed to each other completely, when one person had the courage to help a stranger, and when both chose to build rather than destroy, to hope rather than despair, to love rather than hate. Their story began with shackles and debt, with injustice and fear. But it ended with freedom and love, with family and legacy, with a life so full and rich that it inspired everyone who knew them. Quinton Garrett had paid $2,500 to free Brielle Palmer from a debt she never owed. In return, she had given him something priceless, a reason to stay, a home to return to, a love that sustained him through every day of his life. They had both been searching without knowing it, both been lost in their own ways. And then they found each other on a dusty street in 1878, and everything changed. He gave her freedom. She gave him purpose. Together they built a love story that would outlast them both, a testament to the truth that sometimes the best things in life begin with an act of simple kindness toward a stranger. Their love had been forged in adversity but tempered by joy. It had been tested by time but never broken. It had started with a cowboy who paid off a debt and set a woman free, and it had ended only when death finally parted them. And even then, those who had known them believed that Quinton and Brielle Garrett were together still, their souls reunited in whatever came after this life, their love story continuing beyond the boundaries of mortal existence. In the end, that was their greatest legacy, not the businesses they built, or the wealth they accumulated, or even the family they created. Though all of those mattered, their greatest legacy was the proof that love, true love, the kind that commits and endures and transforms, was not just possible, but worth every sacrifice required to achieve it. They had shown everyone who knew them that sometimes, against all odds, the fairy tale was real. The knight did arrive to save the day. The rescued maiden did find her happily ever after, and they lived it every single day until death finally claimed them both. Together forever, just as they had promised. From freedom to love. From that first meeting to their final partings, their story remained what it had always been, a testament to the transformative power of love, the importance of standing up for justice, and the beautiful truth that sometimes the best things in life begin when one person decides to help another, expecting nothing in return. The cowboy paid the debt and set her free, and in doing so, he freed them both.